Hello, everyone.
About 2 months ago, I, 29, finalized my divorce from my ex-wife, Abby, 27. Turns out, she'd been having an affair with none other than my estranged younger brother, Ryan, also 27. I found out she was pregnant, and at first, Abby tried to convince me that the baby was mine. But Ryan's constant visits and their interactions raised some doubts, so I decided to check her phone. When I confronted her about what I'd found, she couldn't deny it any longer and finally admitted to cheating on me with my own brother. My family and I hadn't been close since I left home at 18, mostly because they'd always made me feel like an outsider. Ryan was clearly the favored child, and that became painfully obvious at a party that was supposedly meant to celebrate my acceptance into college. When I arrived, I realized it wasn't really about me at all. My family had actually planned the whole thing for Ryan. They told me that after I'd received my acceptance letter, they didn't want Ryan to feel left out, so they decided to celebrate him instead. That crushed me, and I made up my mind right then to keep my distance from them for good. I put myself through college with loans and part-time jobs, rented a small place with a friend afterward, and never looked back. I didn't speak to my parents, and they never made an effort to reach out either. But a year ago, Ryan messaged me, saying that he and my parents wanted to reconnect. By then, I was married and doing pretty well, but there was still a lot of unresolved resentment toward them. Eventually, I agreed to meet, and though it was awkward and uncomfortable, they seemed to genuinely want to make amends. I decided to make an effort as well, and even invited them into my home. I can see now that this was my first mistake, as it brought my brother and Abby together, and they began their affair. When Abby announced her pregnancy, I was over the moon, assuming the baby was mine. But soon after, Ryan started showing up more and more, even going so far as to touch her belly and talk to the unborn child. When I questioned it, Abby brushed it off, but I couldn't ignore my gut feeling. 6 months into her pregnancy, I decided to go through her phone while she was asleep, and that was when I saw the text confirming the worst. Not only had she been involved with Ryan for a long time, but she planned on keeping the baby's true parentage a secret until after the birth. After that, she and Ryan would tell me, she'd file for divorce, and then they'd live off the child support I'd be paying. The next morning, I confronted her. She tried to lie her way out of it at first, but she soon admitted everything. That was the end of our 2-year marriage, and as expected, my parents immediately sided with Abby and Ryan. It was clear that all their words about valuing both me and Ryan equally had been hollow. When Abby and Ryan announced their relationship on social media, the whole family rallied behind them. No one seemed to care that my life had been turned upside down or that Abby had lied to me for months, leading me to believe that I was going to be a father. My parents even told me I should be happy for them, as if it was their job to dictate how I should feel about losing my wife and the future family I thought I'd have. Cutting them out again was an easy choice, but it didn't end there. The divorce turned ugly because Abby's attorney, backed by my family, fabricated this story that painted me as controlling and abusive, claiming that I'd forced her to leave her job, something she'd actually done of her own choice. My family backed her story, claiming they'd distanced themselves from me years ago because of my supposed temper and misogynistic attitude. With all this fabricated evidence stacked against me, I lost a lot of money in the divorce settlement. Abby got a large sum of money in my car, though thankfully, I managed to keep the house. At the end of it all, I was relieved to be free of this mess and the toxic people involved, and where I live, there's no waiting period for a divorce, so I was able to finalize it quickly. Moving on wasn't easy, but I buried myself in work and focused on improving myself, determined to move past the whole ordeal. The hard work paid off because, 2 weeks ago, I was promoted to a higher position with a better salary and a new company car. The timing couldn't have been better, and for the first time in a long while, I finally felt genuinely happy. After my promotion, I decided to treat myself to a solo dinner at one of my favorite restaurants, just to celebrate. I made the mistake of sharing a picture of it online, and within a day or so, my mom got in touch, asking me to come by for a visit. I was completely confused as to why they'd suddenly reach out now, considering we hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized, and they'd openly supported my ex and all her lies. I tried to ignore it, but my mom started calling me nonstop. When that didn't work, she even showed up at my office, causing quite a scene by arguing with the receptionist. It was embarrassing enough that I eventually agreed to visit, just to get her to leave. A few days later, I made my way over to my family's new place. They had apparently used the settlement money to move into a bigger house to make room for the baby, who'd been born just over 3 weeks earlier. I assumed the alimony I was paying was helping cover their expenses, though it wasn't exactly a huge chunk of my paycheck. When I arrived, my brother wasn't around, and Abby was asleep, so it was just my parents. I didn't bother with small talk and just waited for them to get to the point. After a few awkward minutes, my dad blurted out that my brother had been fired, and now they were running out of money. They'd seen my promotion post and hoped I'd help them out. Both my parents had retired long ago, and with Ryan out of a job, plus Abby obviously not returning to work anytime soon, the alimony I was paying wasn't enough to support them all, especially with the newborn in the picture. I was shocked they even had the nerve to ask after everything that had happened. For a few moments, I was too stunned to speak, but I quickly snapped out of it and decided that I didn't need to put up with this. I simply stood up, walked to the door, and opened it to leave. As I did, I found Ryan standing outside. My parents tried to get me to stay and hear them out, and Ryan seemed a bit alarmed to see me. Still, I didn't say a word and walked away. It was raining hard, and as I searched my pockets for my car keys, my family followed me outside, asking for help one last time. This time, it was Ryan making the plea, which was strange to see. He'd always been smug and arrogant, thanks to our parents' treatment, so I could tell it must have taken a lot for him to ask. I could see they were genuinely in trouble, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I lost my temper and told them to leave me alone, suggesting they try begging on the street if they were so desperate. Maybe some stranger would show them more sympathy than I ever could. With that, I got in my car and drove off, leaving them in the rain. I won't lie, it felt incredibly satisfying after a lifetime of mistreatment. It's been 2 days since that confrontation, and I've been feeling conflicted. My mom's been bombarding me with texts, and I feel this nagging guilt for not helping. I know I'm in a place where I could easily spare some money for them, but after everything they've done, it just feels like they're using me again. Update 1. After wrestling with guilt, I decided not to give them any financial support. It was a tough call because I genuinely felt like I was abandoning them, but then I reminded myself that they'd done the same to me my entire life. Even during the divorce, they threw me under the bus. So, I messaged my mom, telling her to stop pestering me or I'd get my lawyers involved. Naturally, that didn't sit well with them, and a few days later, Ryan showed up at my house. Ryan told me he was sorry for how I'd been treated growing up but claimed it wasn't his fault. He was just inherently better than me, which is why our parents favored him. He suggested I stop acting weird with our parents and just help them out like any good son would. The sheer absurdity of it made me laugh in his face. I told him that instead of wasting his time trying to guilt-trip me, he should probably go look for a job. That comment must have hit a nerve because he started shouting about how I was just jealous that everyone, even my ex-wife, preferred him over me, and that I was refusing to help out of spite. I didn't even bother to argue. I just went along with it, telling Ryan he was absolutely right and that my refusal to help was purely out of spite. That seemed to infuriate him even more, and he told me he'd make me pay one way or another, and that I'd regret ever speaking to him like that. Honestly, I couldn't take him seriously. He could try to threaten me all he wanted, but I knew he wasn't capable of actually following through on any of it. His words didn't faze me in the least. Update 2. A few days ago, my brother came by again, trying once more to convince me to help, but like before, he got nowhere. My parents had already made their attempts, which had failed. So this time my ex, Abby, took it upon herself to call me. I was hesitant to answer, but I figured if I ignored her, she'd just show up in person and waste even more of my time. When I picked up, she started with a polite tone, acknowledging that while I wasn't obligated to help, she hoped I might reconsider for the sake of family. She tried to appeal to my sympathy by reminding me that my parents had supported me financially when I was growing up, and that she tried to be a good wife, as if those things erased all the damage they'd done. I wasn't buying any of it. My parents had only ever cared about Ryan, and she betrayed me with him. I told her that, as it was, I was already paying alimony she didn't deserve, given her infidelity. She only got away with it the first time because my family had lied to make me look like the bad guy, and she'd manipulated the system to her advantage. Abby started sobbing on the phone, calling me selfish and heartless. The irony was lost on her. When I continued to refuse, she got nasty, telling me that Ryan was right and that I'd left her with no choice but to go back to court and demand even more alimony. She promised to drag me through another humiliating trial. This time, though, I was ready to fight. I wasn't going to roll over like I had during the first divorce proceedings, when I'd been so emotionally spent that I didn't have the energy to defend myself. I'd never been controlling or abusive as they'd claimed, and Abby had no grounds for a single dollar. But back then, I didn't care about the financial fallout. I just wanted the whole ordeal over with. Update 3. To my surprise, Abby actually followed through and filed for a higher alimony amount, citing my recent promotion as justification. But this time, I wasn't letting her have it her way. I reached out to our mutual friends, explaining the truth behind our divorce, which most of them hadn't known. They were shocked, and several agreed to testify on my behalf if it came to that. I also informed my lawyer that I wanted to cut the alimony off altogether, as she truly didn't deserve it. I gathered all the evidence I could, documenting the way my family had treated me and how they were only after my money now that they knew about my promotion. A few cousins who'd seen firsthand how my family favored Ryan over me agreed to vouch for my side. Even though we'd never been particularly close, they understood what I'd endured and were willing to help. My lawyer was pleased with the case we'd built and felt confident that we could end the alimony payments for good. This time, I wasn't going to let my family get away with portraying me as the villain. They'd made me out to be a terrible person, while Ryan was painted as some kind of hero who'd rescued Abby. But now, I was determined to set the record straight. In court, I presented several video testimonies from friends and a few relatives who knew the truth. My family sat in stunned silence, clearly not expecting me to push back so hard. I think they assumed I'd fold as easily as I had before, but I was no longer the same fragile person they'd once manipulated. Yesterday, the court ruled in my favor, terminating the alimony due to the new evidence presented. I can't describe the relief I felt knowing I was finally free from paying my cheating ex anything. The look on my family's faces, especially Abby's, was priceless. She looked on the verge of tears, but for once, I couldn't have cared less. For the first time, I felt like I was truly done with this entire mess, and it was the most satisfying moment I've had in years. I had planned to unwind for the evening with some good takeout and a movie, treating myself to a night of peace. But, as if on cue, my family seemed determined to do whatever they could to disrupt any bit of happiness I might find. Just as I was pulling up to my place, I spotted my brother's car parked right outside. I was thoroughly confused about why he'd be there, but I went inside anyway. There they were, my whole family, waiting right outside my door, blocking my way in. For a moment, I was so stunned I couldn't find words. I decided, though, to act as if it didn't bother me at all. I told them to get off my property unless they wanted me to call the cops. That's when my dad took the chance to start a lecture, telling me that I should feel ashamed of myself for what I'd done that day. He went on about how I had no sense of family responsibility and how I'd betrayed them by refusing to help when they needed it most. Once he finished, I didn't bother responding. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me react because I knew their goal was to rile me up enough to do something rash or foolish. I wasn't about to play into their hands, though, and I hoped they'd realize that their desperate attempts weren't going to change my mind. My silence must have gotten under their skin even more because my mom demanded I show respect and speak to my dad. I ignored her, too. I could see their frustration growing, likely because they were expecting an argument and none was coming. After a while, my brother finally lost his temper, grabbed me by the collar, and tried to take a swing at me. My dad managed to pull him back just in time. Ryan screamed at me, calling me a jealous loser who'd never amount to anything. I couldn't help but laugh. It was absurd to hear that from someone who was unemployed, still living with his parents, and begging his brother for money. I told them again that they needed to leave or I would actually call the police, and since they were so financially strained, they should probably take off within the next 5 minutes. Begrudgingly, they finally backed off, though my mom made one last attempt to guilt-trip me into giving them money. It still didn't work, and eventually, they left. It's been nearly a day since all this happened, and they haven't tried to contact me again. I can only hope it stays that way. What do you think about this story? Write in comments. If you don't follow our channel Cheating Room, you will probably never hear from us again. If you are subscribed, congratulations, you will not miss any exciting story. Thank you for listening to this shocking story with us. See you again.
Bye bye.